Hi, and welcome to Contracts Over Coffee, the podcast where we talk about all things contracting while sipping a delicious coffee beverage. I'm your host, Ann Baker, Senior Director of Partner Marketing at Icertis. And with me today is Prashant Dubey, Vice President and General Manager of Contract Services at our law company partner, Elevate. Prashant is a serial entrepreneur with his last venture, Sumiti, being acquired by Elevate Services in December 2018. Prashant has co-authored a number of industry books, such as The Generalist Counsel and Litigation Readiness. Welcome to the program today, Prashant.
Thank you, Anne, for the kind introduction and the kind words.
Now, we like to start this program with the same question for all our guests. Prashant, what is your story?
Well, I think you've probably given a pretty good encapsulation of it, but I'll expand upon it slightly without being self-aggrandizing. I think my career started off over 30 years ago, gulp, and 10 years at Baxter Healthcare Corporation in the healthcare industry, doing strategy consulting in a joint venture between Bain and Baxter for large healthcare institutions, and then switched my focus to a lot of M&A work in Asia, in India, China, Vietnam, and a lot of other countries in the region, which is a fantastic experience. After that, I moved from the Chicagoland area to Portland, Oregon, and high tech was really picking up at that time, especially software companies. So I ended up joining as an executive or founding about 4 software companies in different spaces, which ended up exiting to either private equity companies or to strategic buyers in different spaces, from management accounting to information security to IT portfolio management. So that was a fantastic experience. And then I stumbled upon legal services in the early 2000s when I was running an e-discovery company with a friend. And it became one of the market leading e-discovery companies in the industry and was ultimately acquired by a strategic acquirer. That's what prompted me to found Sumiti. And Sumiti was a company focused 100% on contract management. And we did 2 principal things. One was we substantively analyzed and reviewed over 10 million contract documents using technology and lawyers to be able to extract metadata for obligation management, as well as to populate repositories and CLM systems, but also to help companies respond to regulatory inquiries and compliance-related requests. So that became a specialty area we were known for, and we tied that very closely to our services with a large team of technologists that focused on configuring, maintaining, and supporting contract lifecycle management systems such as Icertis. Mm-hmm. And this was a fantastic service because it really supported user adoption in companies. And we grew to over 300 people, and we were acquired by Elevate in December. And as you mentioned, I'm today responsible for the contracts business unit at Elevate, which is a 1,300 person plus global organization that we call ourselves a law company. So just wanted to expand upon that a little bit in terms of background. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever had anyone on the program that's been through that many acquisitions. That's an impressive statistic, and your background in contract management is perfect for our discussion. So I'm sure, being the head of contract services there, that you are getting exposed to all sorts of different contracting challenges every day with your customers and clients. What do you think is the biggest contracting challenge today?
You know, what's really fascinating about contracting is, despite how long people have been talking about it, it's still a very nascent marketplace. A very small percentage of companies have process discipline around contracting, and an equally small number have infused technology, either workflow or artificial intelligence technology, into their contracting practices. And what's interesting about this is there's a lot of rhetoric, understandably so, and promise around technology solutions. And the gap between what those technology solutions can deliver and the reality of marrying that as an enabler to people and process is something that I think is the biggest challenge right now. And the reason why practically it's a challenge is a lot of executives and companies, from general counsel to CFOs to CEOs, expect that contracting will magically be made efficient if you just buy technology and infuse it. And as a technology company, I think you know that there's a lot of change management involved in the implementation of these. And the software can be extremely capable, but I have found that as organizations internalize technology, they sometimes overlook the change management elements of it and how processes need to be streamlined and optimized, as well as people need to be viewed from a change management perspective. Let me give you a really concrete example. It's obvious that if somebody creates, drafts, red lines, negotiates, and approves and executes a contract in Icertis, that workflow is absolutely more efficient than doing it with stone tablets and chisels like Microsoft Word with red lines and email. That sounds fantastic in concept, but if I'm a lawyer in a legal department and I'm used to Microsoft Word and track changes and attaching it to email and getting my work done and going home to my family at night, the promise of a CLM system is fantastic, but sometimes organizations overlook the change that that's going to mean in an organization. And really focusing on user adoption and the challenges associated with it will help technology to really fulfill its promise, which I do think has tremendous promise in organizations. So sorry for that long-winded response, but I do think that emphasizing this as a challenge is really material, so companies can manage expectations of executives in terms of the ROI timeframe it'll take to get a return on a technology investment.
Yeah, I think that's a terrific point. I mean, certainly we've seen with so many implementations, the ones that a customer really takes a moment and uses the implementation as an opportunity to reevaluate their contracting processes and figure out, are we doing this right? Is this how we wanted to do as, across the board as an organization? Can really make a huge difference in the success and the adoption of the product. And thinking that technology is going to be a Band-Aid if you already have bad contracting processes and just problems getting contracts through the whole life cycle, it's not going to solve it. You really need to kind of go hand in hand with reevaluating what you're doing and how you're doing contracting and making sure that you're setting it up in a way that's really scalable and repeatable for the organization. So I think that's a great point.
Yeah, and I think that emphasis that you place on it is really important, and it comes true when people think about artificial intelligence, for example. Sometimes there's a tremendous amount of anxiety in lawyers' minds that AI is meant to replace the work that they're doing. In fact, it's not. We like to say we'd like to enable lawyers to practice more law. So the real promise of AI is to enable lawyers in corporate legal departments as well as law firms to be able to focus on more substantive issues that actually allow them to utilize their legal training. Right now, a lot of lawyers are doing non-bespoke, routine work that's business as usual over and over and over in the exact same way. AI and workflow technology can really assist that so that they can focus their time on more strategic issues and be advisors to the business, which really reduces risk for the organization overall. So I do think that an emphasis on this will actually empower and enable lawyers more to do work that's more meaningful to them rather than any fear of replacing what they do.
Yeah, that is sort of the next question I typically ask is sort of where do you think contracting is going? And so do you think that, that AI component is really kind of where it's headed in the next step?
I actually do. I do. What's interesting is AI has existed in data science, machine learning, and natural language processing in this particular domain for probably a decade. One of the challenges with it, again, is that same gap between expectations and the reality. So one of the early places that AI has been applied, and is still a big challenge, is on extraction of information from contracts that are fully executed to have post-execution obligation management conducted more fluidly, as well as being able to respond to things like GDPR or CCPA regulatory compliance requirements, or if somebody needs to have a LIBOR remediation project where short-term lending rates are being changed from LIBOR to something else like SOFR, you need to extract the information from agreements to know how to amend them. And artificial intelligence technology can be applied to it to a certain extent, but again, it enables people to do their work more efficiently rather than just throwing bodies at it. But it certainly isn't an elixir. So despite my comments previously about the challenges with technology, where I do think that a lot of organizations are going is deploying AI in a more rational way, and they're starting to internalize 10 years after the beginning of the infusion of this technology into contracting, that it really is an enabler, not an elixir. Similarly, when redline agreements against a defined standard of clauses or provisions that you'd like in an agreement, identifying deviations, it's an imperfect science to do that with the push of a big green button. You can identify deviations, but then you need lawyers to actually adjudicate and reconcile those deviations in a manual way. And that's okay. It increases efficiency, but what it does not do is replace the lawyers and their substantive judgment.
Yeah, I think earlier this year, I think it was McKinsey Press, but they came out with a stat that said something like 23% of a lawyer's work could be automated by using technology. And I think it was a scary stat for a lot of people. But then, we recently just did a webinar with one of our customers, Gordon Food Service, and they had an article in, I think it was law.com, where they talked about how implementing contract lifecycle management technology freed them up, like to automate those manual tasks that were not strategic for the business, and then allow the legal team there to really move into a position where they had more time to be a leader in the company and drive big initiatives, as opposed to just doing some of those manual contract due diligence things and that you could automate. And AI is going to be a critical component for that, especially for larger enterprises too, that have to do things at scale and have to analyze all the attributes across thousands of contracts. The efficiencies you can gain with AI are just, incredible. And so we're starting to see more and more companies really adopt that and try it out, even if it's at, just in one area of the business. And so it's nice to kind of see. The one other thing I'll bring up is I saw a stat, I think it was this week, from World Commerce and Contracting, and they were talking about how the pandemic has really caused, I think it was like 65% of companies to go back and reevaluate, like, should they be implementing a CLM solution, and what could technology be doing to help them get more efficient around their contracting processes. So I think it is having a bit of a moment right now. And sometimes this whole pandemic has maybe brought that to the forefront, but it's good to kind of see that people are, even though it's in early days, looking at more and more ways they can really adopt and implement not just CLM, but also AI capabilities as well.
Yeah, no, and that's a great point. It brings to mind an example from a global athletic apparel company. He's one of the industry. And they have 2,200 global users of a CLM system. And what they really want to do is make sure that the people that are using it out in the marketplace, these days virtually, not physically, don't have to be experts in CLM technology and workflow. So for example, this company might have sports marketing professionals that are creating relationships with athletes. And these aren't necessarily, some of them are rock star athletes, some of them are rank and file athletes. So let's say in this particular company, a sports marketing person is sitting virtually in front of a Major League Baseball player and saying, I want to create a representation agreement with you. They don't necessarily, the sports marketing individual at our customer doesn't necessarily need to be an expert in this process. What they do is they essentially call up a support line, they dial a number, and they hit the number 2. It gets routed to us, and we walk them through how to create the agreement on their iPad. And then that agreement is automatically sent to the Major League Baseball player who they might be talking to, so they can focus on the relationship. And the electronic signature process is initiated after that very quick initiation and drafting of the agreement between the two parties. And so they can focus on the relationship, and we walk them through it on the phone in multiple languages, 16 hours a day, 6 days. And so as basic as that sounds, that enables the adoption of this particular process. At the end of that process, that contract is automatically routed into the CLM system with AI extracting the metadata. So it's available for analysis and review and obligation management within 24 hours after the execution of that contract. That's increased user adoption by, 80, 100% over the past couple of years.
Yeah, that is kind of the use case you want to see happening, right? You want to see where people immediately get their contract signed and then it's there and available for them to surface insights out of and track obligations. And we're seeing more and more companies, head there. So the next question I kind of have for you is, what is one contracting tip you wish every person knew?
One thing I would probably say is that starting to think about a contract management business process from the back to the front is probably the most rational thing to do. So a lot of people think that when they're implementing technology or thinking about a contract management business process, they need to first come in and harmonize or simplify their templates, combine 3 templates and make one, or create contracting playbooks that represent provisions from agreements that represent their desired stance, as well as alternatives in descending order of risk. That's not necessarily the first place to start, in my opinion. The best place to start is create a high integrity single source of truth contract repository that contains all of the material agreements that your company has that represent your obligations and your counterparty's obligations, with metadata extracted. The benefit of this is not just being able to automatically send out trigger notifications when something is about to renew or expire, but imagine this scenario. You can now empirically look at a starting point contracting template and empirically get from your single source of truth repository 15 or 20 examples of your ending point. And now you can say, where are the deviations between the starting point and the ending point in these particular provisions, and very empirically document that and say, what is the negotiation intensity that has occurred in each one of these situations based on how much the ending point language has changed from the starting point? That becomes the basis for the creation of a playbook that contains provisions that support negotiation. So if you start with the end, you have empirically a tremendous amount of information to inform the creation of playbooks, the deviations from the template, the number of variations, so you can inform yourself in terms of how to standardize and simplify templates, rather than starting from the beginning and having a process where you have to sit in a room for hours and discuss and debate with lawyers what language they want in this or that. You can present back to them, here's what we've agreed to in the past. Here's precedent language that the company considers acceptable risk to us. Let's present that back to you as a starting point. Now, as a straw man, you can provide your input or feedback to that. So as counterintuitive as that may sound, we found that it's very productive to go through the process of setting up that repository up front and then using it for all of this empirical, valuable information, which truly does exist in our organization.
It is interesting. I mean, well, we're at our company, of course, we're always pushing for the repository to be set up early, but the idea of using a lot of that data to serve as a precedent that you can start with, then to build off of, is an interesting approach. You don't think, you very much think of contracting as starting with creating that initial template and then moving it down, but I like that tip. That's a good one, and it'll be interesting to see how many of our audience tries to apply it. So now I'm kind of curious. We've talked a lot about tips and about challenges, but what would really surprise our audience to know about contracting today?
Despite all of it, I think the one thing that'll surprise people is that it's actually much simpler than they think. I mean, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. And if you eat this in chunks and rationally put a program in place that, one, socializes the need for change management and manages expectations of executives and builds out an ROI scenario over a 3-year period versus a 1 or an 18-month scenario, we found that in organizations, regardless of size, there's an organizational speed limit that allows people to internalize this change system in a proper way. And once that organizational speed limit is acknowledged and recognized, I think that people can actually, this is a tackleable problem, let's put it that way, and it's not overwhelming. And so if you do things like starting with a repository, it's very gratifying to lawyers to say, okay, if you're going to put me through this process of changing my workflow, of drafting agreements in a system versus, in Microsoft Word off of my shared drive with track changes and email, at least to have the benefit of knowing that when I'm negotiating with the counterparty, I'm actually in a strong negotiating position because I have in a repository the agreement with the counterparty and all related documents which show me what our stance is in previous discussions. That puts me in a stronger negotiating position. Their ability to then absorb the change in their upfront workflow becomes much greater when they're gratified by having that available to them. So doing something simple like that really enables a program to take root and to get a tremendous amount of support. I mean, as we know, just like any organization, lawyers sometimes in law departments operate just like they would in a law firm. Each lawyer may behave independently, and it's very difficult to rule by fiat. And most general counsel I know will not go in there and impose their will upon their organization. They trust their lawyers, and they want their lawyers to buy in, and a consensus-driven approach is much better. So in that particular situation, you have to figure out, how do you give them something that gratifies them? So I would probably say it is simpler than people think, as long as it's taken one step at a time, and there's a lot of socialization of incrementally how a program can be changed.
Yeah, I like that, because it can seem overwhelming, I think, and that can hinder sometimes people adopting this technology to help automate this process, because they're like, oh, I have thousands of contracts and there are all these different types and so many attributes. Where do I even begin? And if they can just take small steps, even if it's just in one area of contracting, the benefits they can slowly start to see with just improving revenues, improving administration costs, and reducing those can really start to add up. And then as you expand it across your business slowly over time, then it's when you really start seeing the ROIs. Now, yeah.
Sorry to interrupt, Anne, but an example that comes to mind really is that I'm shocked at how many organizations are still using sort of arcane processes for managing things like non-disclosure agreements or confidential disclosure agreements in pharma companies, CDAs versus NDAs, to not confuse the terminology. And, the legal department receives a request, they draft an NDA, they send it out, and if it's on company paper, a lot of times, 60 to 70% of the time, it'll come back signed without any negotiation. But there's a lot of self-serve models that can be put in place with workflows for what we would call an instant NDA. Send it out there, get it signed, and get it back in the repository. And you can focus your effort then on those things that come in on counterparty paper that you actually have to review and negotiate. And NDAs are something that are low-hanging fruit for organizations. They're a relatively straightforward agreement. They're relatively short, and there's probably no more than 3 to 5 versions of it in any organization. Sometimes there's a lot more if it's a complex organization, but 3 to 5 templates is something that can easily be managed. So I think that using simple things like starting with a repository, as well as looking at contract types like NDAs as a proof point, are something that a lot of organizations can do, but I would say 95+% of organizations we've met are still doing NDAs the old-fashioned way.
That's amazing. That's a crazy statistic. Because, I mean, as you said, like, those are the things that are repeatable, that you want to get off your plate and automate so that you can focus on the more strategic, more important aspects of your job. So hopefully people are hearing you, Prashant, and taking your advice. So I want to switch gears a little bit now. We've certainly talked about contracting and things people would be surprised to know about contracting. And now I want to talk about you, Prashant. What do you think people would be surprised to know about you?
Well, I don't know how surprising this is. It presumes that I'm actually more interesting than people would perceive me as, which may not. My kids would probably say, "Dad, you're interesting," and they're probably right. But I mean, the fact of the matter is that I'm not a lawyer, but I really enjoy interacting with lawyers, the intellectual inquisitiveness that lawyers have, the different personalities that lawyers have. Litigators are very different than commercial lawyers, than intellectual property lawyers, and it's fascinating to me how they all generally practice law, but everybody does it in a very different way and has a very different perception of the law. So, for example, I'm on the board of my alma mater, the University of Chicago, and as part of this board, I am working in conjunction with the law school and the business school to try to focus on the intersection of law, business, and technology. And it's amazing to me how sometimes the lawyers, the professors at these universities view the teaching of law as a very sort of purist discipline rather than the intersection of these things. And a lot of law schools are just starting to come around to the intersection of these dimensions. And that's the reality of how law practice works in law firms and law departments today. And so that's fascinating to me. So I guess what maybe would surprise people is that despite the fact that I'm not a lawyer, I've actually become quite a student of law practice. I wouldn't be cavalier enough to claim that I'm an expert in the sense that I can practice law. I certainly am not. But
I bet you could get close, Prashant, at this point. I bet you could get close.
Maybe I could fool people, which may not be the best thing in the world. I guess I really enjoy interacting with lawyers simply because of the intellectual energy and inquisitiveness and variability of personalities that they bring in law practice.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a role you can go in a lot of different directions, and there's quite a different span of elements that you can dive into in different law practices. So it is kind of a very interesting area, and I'm sure you've been exposed to almost all of it at this point. So final question for you, Prashant. What inspires you? What gets you up in the morning?
What gets me up in the morning is the simple things.
Mm-hmm.
The pandemic has reinforced for everybody the importance of simplicity and appreciating a moment with your child, if it's fleeting. Making a breakfast sandwich for your child when they woke up late for their Zoom call at school or college, and they send you a text from their room saying, "Hey, I'm late. I woke up late. Do you mind making me some breakfast?" And you're in the middle of your phone call for work, but you're multitasking and you're trying to make a breakfast sandwich for them. Enjoying and really internalizing the simplicity of that type of interaction to me is what gets me out of bed every day, is appreciating those simple things because they're fleeting moments. And I think that this pandemic has reinforced for us all how our priorities are not necessarily work at the forefront.
Yeah.
For me personally, it's family and work, and it always has been, but it's definitely been reinforced right now. So that's something about me personally that has really sort of, I feel is a key definitional part of who I am. And probably for many people who are watching this today feel probably exactly the same way. I'm not alone.
Yes, that's so true. And I will say, definitely the pandemic has made us all slow down in some ways and appreciate and be grateful for what we have. And I am grateful for this moment you've taken with us today. And thanks for making the time with us. And thanks for the continued partnership with Elevate and Icertis. I know we'll continue to service more customers and do great things together. So that brings us to the end of our program today. Thank you again, Prashant, for being with us.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, great. And I will tell our audience to please take a moment and go check out elevateservices.com. They've been a terrific partner to Icertis. And thank you again, Prashant, for your time.
Fantastic. You have a great day and great weekend, Anne.